All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarit Chalmish, and I oversee the partnership between ProShip and Manhattan Associates. And we're very glad to have you all today joining us at this wonderful webinar about peak planning for year-round opportunities, how to leverage the now for later. With that, I would love to introduce our amazing speakers today. We have with us Justin Kramer and Scott Scoff. A little bit about our speakers today. Well, Justin here is the Global Project Management Director and co-founder of ProShip multi-carrier shipping software. He has deployed, designed, or consulted in multi-carrier shipping for over 300 customer shipping solutions, ranging 4 continents, and in fact has worked on designing solutions executing more than 1.1 million labels a day. Justin has been on the IT side of shipping since 2001. Welcome, Justin. And we have Scott. Scott is the Vice President of Customer Support for Manhattan Distribution Management Solutions in the Americas. He leads global call center operations, post-implementation services, operations advisement teams, and customer success management. In addition, Scott leverages his 20 years at Manhattan to lend his advice to customers when they design their world-class production support processes for Manhattan solutions. Lastly, Scott leads the peak season preparation and support program for Manhattan Associates. So with that, Justin and Scott will share today their experiences, strategies, and insights as they relate to approaching peak season preparation, both methodically and proactively. I'll turn it over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Sarit. Welcome, everybody. So I've been looking forward to this webinar as the topic of peak season prep is pretty near and dear to me. I've been in the trenches here with Manhattan and our customers since the holiday peak seasons really became those more significant peak seasons over the last 10 to 15 years as a result of e-commerce and more recently omni-channel demands. So we've been able to move from reactionary to more proactive and been developing a more structured approach to increase our customer success. That said, ever-changing trends in market and consumer behavior means we need to keep evolving and keep the ability to build in the ability to satisfy new demands from customers quickly, while of course mitigating the inherent risk associated with significantly changing those systems year over year. So yeah, our objectives today, number one would be to share our structured peak season preparation process and share some tactical yet impactful peak season best practices. Hey, Justin, did I miss any of the objectives?
Yeah, so the one thing I would want to add is that we'll be sharing that we're seeing a lot of trends out in the field, and one of our goals today is to share what we're seeing, especially as it relates to peak season prep. So I would say that their objective would be share strategic industry trends with our audience.
Yeah, agreed. That sounds good. So let's go ahead and proceed. So you'll notice the graphic on the slide here showing the cyclical nature of peak season preparation. So it's indeed a never-ending process of continuous improvement with the goal of kind of stepping one step ahead. As for the agenda, we're first going to go through the general planning calendar. So I'm going to show the cyclical approach in a calendar form, and then I'll get into the details of each of the phases, and finally we'll wrap it up with some key takeaways. So let's get into the details. We can move on to the peak season calendar. So hey, Justin, I recall that when we were originally questioning the timing of this webinar, we were kind of joking a little bit around, a webinar on November 1st for peak season preparation doesn't seem like quite the right timing. But
exactly.
I think we quickly realized, maybe it would be an ideal time to do it because, well, first, I think we have everybody's attention here on November 1st, right? Peak season is certainly top of mind right now for everybody. And I don't think a webinar in February would have had that effect. Not sure how many attendees we have. And then the other concept we were talking about was we thought this was an opportune time to implement a very important role, such that you can, truly leverage the now for later. And that was that concept of that peak season record keeping role.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the things that we know is it's really important as we go into other phases of this calendar that we have a diligent record keeper, somebody who can record those challenges and successes. If you get nothing else from the webinar today, we hope you at least take the step to establish the role, maybe at a departmental level, maybe at a company level, to capture all this very valuable information that occurs during the chaos of your peak. In late December, you may realize so much has occurred since mid-November that you simply forget the things that you want to look at.
Indeed. Yes. So with that, let me quickly run through this typical peak season prep cycle, showing it to you in this calendar form. I do want to acknowledge, though, that some of you clearly would have different peak seasons, right? Different customers have different peak seasons, spring or back to school, special sales, or for some, even major product launches are considered a peak season. But for the purposes of simplicity here, we're going to focus on the calendar for the traditional November-December holiday season. So typically we view the peak prep calendar as starting with the strategic planning phase, occurring in those first early months of the year, followed by the execution of everything that's chosen, the execution of the development or deployment of those initiatives. Then, of course, the validation of those initiatives to ensure they yield the expected results and of course, are resilient to those high order volumes we will later see at peak. And it's important to note here, if you look at the calendar, that testing phase is typically occurring mid-year. So you have time to react to anything you find, right? Before that readiness phase then occurs in the September-October timeframe. And then the monitoring and support phase, that's really about where we are right now, right? We're right on the cusp of rolling into peak season. And then lastly, we need to spend a little bit of time on this too, is the importance of a peak season follow-up that should be occurring in January. Again, the calendar could be different for you depending on when your highest demand occurs.
Yeah. So Scott, question for you here. So
Sure.
This calendar, is this really more for the Targets and the Kohl's of the world, or would maybe a shorter calendar apply to other smaller retailers or manufacturers or things of that nature?
Yeah. So based on my interaction with, at least my Manhattan customers here, this calendar seems pretty typical for all, because if you think about it, the size of IT capacity pretty much typically scales with that size of customer. I think the other point there would be, some of those smaller specialty retailers, they got a lot riding on their peak season. It can truly be a make or break time of year. So, so the risk of peak season can be pretty significant for them, which probably means they want to build more time into their plan, more contingency into their project plans. Okay. I guess one other thing. While I have had customers begin their strategic planning, I would say in the the June time frame with the aim to implement a new configuration or new enhancement or whatever, but they're sacrificing the ability to perform that volume performance test, that VPT, and truly make sure those changes bake in before peak, which I guess kind of underscores the whole point of sharing this calendar. If you look across and understand all these important phases, you can see why it's so important to start the prep early.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and let's move on then, and let's start with monitoring and support. So this is basically where we are right now, and as we already mentioned, this is a great time to set up that record keeping role. It really cannot impress upon our audience enough that if you don't start writing things down as you go through this season, both the right and the wrong, with examples wherever practical, so much is going to be lost before the strategic planning phase, and many of the next three portions of this cycle will just not work as well if we don't actually have good documentation of the everything that occurs over the next two phases.
Yes, love that point. So the next point there would be change control. All right, that's the next task here. Of course, all of the recommendations from any audits you would have performed, any configuration changes, any new process changes should all be pretty much completed by now. and it's time to establish and act on your freeze dates. Lock it all down, right? This includes the freezing of code, configuration, but you will want to document and obtain the internal buy-in on any process for emergency changes, right?
Yeah, and those emergency changes, I always want to say to my customers, you definitely want to lock things down, but not too tight. I don't know how many times we've seen due to carrier network changes, deals that some logistics managers might get, these super weekends, is what we're starting to hear from a lot of our customers. Being able to flex enough within the system to allow these changes to occur, to take advantage of them, to have a really good season or to avert a disaster within a season is extremely important.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. So another best practice around the change control that I've seen is somebody managing and maintaining a change control log across everything, right? Not in silos, but someone that's maintaining a change control log of what you've changed from a configuration, code, operating system level. Maybe it's a SOP, the distribution center, because it's pretty valuable to reference that if a system incident occurs. Because you all know the first question we ask is when something is occurring in your store, or distribution center, or wherever it is why now? What changed? And a quick reference to that master control log is pretty critical. It saves time. Well, frankly, it saves time when time is of the essence. All right, so when you've executed as much proactive preparation as possible, it's time to ensure you have a very effective rapid response process in place to handle those inevitable unforeseen incidents. So Manhattan and myself, I view this as kind of 5 layers of defense. Right? Number 1 is putting in place those that monitoring and alerting, and even going so far as, well, it might be too late this year, but perhaps next year, leveraging that monitoring and alerting even during your mid-year testings, your compression tests. Right.
Yeah, and one thing I will tell you about that monitoring, it can be really helpful. One of the things we've seen with a lot of our customers, and I'll tell a story about one customer in particular, where they had just some odd downtime. So just like the system slowed to a crawl. And what it turned out to be is because they had good enough monitoring, they were able to determine it all came down to a database. And then they set the monitoring even closer, and they realized that a business analyst trying to do their job was running an unindexed report on live data. Okay, so having that monitoring in place allowed them to find that quickly, solve the problem, and not experience it throughout the rest of the season. And of course, there's always that lesson learned: never pull a new report from live data. Always choose non-live data in your data warehouse, or do it after hours.
Got it. Yeah, good point. So number 2 there in the rapid response layers of defense would be having a well-trained expert frontline support team. So that would be kind of our customers team that are the experts on the solutions. So the folks that you have that are experts on your WMS, your OMS, your shipping systems, and whatnot, ensuring that, and we call that level 2 support, having some experts on the applications you're using. Level 1 would be your help desk. Level 2 would be your experts on the key solutions. Number 3 would be immediate access to those specialty needs, 24/7, right, through peak. I'm referring to DBAs, system administrators, even mechanics. Those people you don't call upon very often, but when you need them, you need them, right? So just don't assume people are going to answer their cell phones. Set up some kind of 24/7 on-call system to have round-the-clock access to those specialists. Moving on, number 4 would be, while it's optional, highly recommended, is dedicated support lined up from your key vendors, such as your material handling providers, Manhattan, ProShip. Right?
You want to make sure that you plan for all of those systems, right, Scott? You want to make sure that it's not just your warehouse systems, but it's your point of sale, your ERP, and any other critical systems within your enterprise software stack.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Good point. And the fifth would be, so this is something special Manhattan does. We add a fifth layer of defense beyond our standard call center. We have what we call ready teams. They're small, autonomous SWAT teams. They have the self-contained skills to solve those most complex issues that are called from our customers during those most three critical weeks. Kind of our secret weapon to rapid response and recovery during peak season for our Manhattan customers.
That's a really responsive option there. Yeah, now is definitely the time to check with your company and with your vendors to see how prepared you are for peak season. And once we've done our peak season, then we move on to post-peak follow-up, right? At this point in time, you've been executing your monitoring and support processes throughout peak. Hopefully you'll have minimal issues. You'll be able to move on to the first steps you should take after peak, okay? Now, this post-peak follow-up, let's not confuse that with the strategic planning meeting. This is more of the ultimate post-mortem. It's the meeting before the meeting. Companies should have, hopefully you've used that recorder person that we talked about to record the issues, successes, and all that from each department, determine why they happen, and what plans can be created to fix these. And then, of course, as a part of this, you're documenting all of those lessons learned.
Yeah. I'd say, Justin, some of our most prepared customers typically hold that post-peak assessment in the January timeframe. Yeah, and again, I can't underscore enough the importance of that role, that record-keeping role, establishing it right now, such that somebody is keeping the memory of all those successes and problems. Because you're going to want that for this January meeting. And again, like you said, it's more of a post-mortem, and this isn't the strategic planning session that we'll talk about next.
Yeah, and as we're all sitting here right now, now's a great time. If you're the one who owns the calendar, put this meeting on your calendar now in January. This way, it can't get confused with all the other priorities that might happen in the beginning of the new year.
I think that's a wise recommendation. All right. So let's give me 1 second here. Move on to the strategic planning phase. Yeah, so this is the strategic meeting to define the plans for the year. Kind of your best opportunity to take that deep dive, evaluate all those lessons learned that you're going to collect, and merge them with the strategic initiatives that provide that direction for the next peak season. And typically those participants are subject matter experts, stakeholders, IT and operations leadership, key vendors.
Yeah. So Scott, in your experience, is this a single meeting or a series of meetings, or is it company dependent?
Well, yeah, it's company dependent, right? So for example, we might have some customers would want us to have an on-site operations review as part of this. In fact, it could be a great time to have we have these operations advisors, right? Manhattan provides. There are folks that really understand the depths of our software. They're the ones that are our design leads, but they'll go to our customers and walk facilities and help them understand how they can better leverage our software. And it's usually an annual visit, but this is a good time to do that. So the result of that meeting may turn into the real bigger strategic meeting, right?
Yeah.
And frankly, I was just going to say some of our other customers are looking for input from people like me and you, Justin, right? From Manhattan and ProShip for what's trending among the other supply chain leaders.
Exactly. So you've mentioned vendors, you've mentioned departmental leads, you mentioned key advisors like the ops advisors. That sounds a lot like a participation list that people might want to put together now.
I agree. Okay, let's move into the gather phase. All right, so this is an important phase.
It is, and it's going to be the largest topic we talk about today. There's so much information available to everybody, but we want to recommend that you focus on what will most affect your business.
Yeah, so what could come out of this? It could be initiatives that are, transformational, corrective, optimizational, even just capacity additions. But really, you got to think about these initiatives, decide whether you lead or follow in your industry into the next peak. So let me start off by highlighting some of the transformational themes that we're seeing trending today. Now, I'm not going to dive into too much detail on these. I'm just going to share some of the themes for you so you can explore them further for your company if they're not already on the table for consideration yet. So the first, of course, we're seeing the usual trends of customers focusing on our e-com and omni-channel strategies, the continued enablement and evolution. So many of those programs continue to surface, and I'm referring to the BOSS and the BOPUS types of scenarios. And fulfillment from stores to increase your overall network capacity.
And, just a side note there, as we talk about stores, in the past few years, we've started to see in ProShip, we started to see a lot more customers where more of their B2C, their business to consumer shipments are coming from their stores than from their DCs. And that's not even counting the external inventory sources like 3PLs and manufacturers.
Yeah, I know, we were talking about that a little bit yesterday, and I was doing a little bit more digging on that. Some of our customers are spent, up to 25 to 50% of their e-com is coming out of their stores. So it's a pretty significant change we're seeing year over year here. Right. And a couple other points around that. Customers are wanting to see that improved network inventory availability and visibility to prevent those lost sales during peak season. Focusing on customer experience items such as email, text notifications, coupon integration, marketplace integration, and a lot of another concept we're seeing more of is these boomerang thresholds. It's that dynamic adjustment of the retention period for the orders, the unattended orders in stores. So if no one's acted on an order that's been sent to a store, it gets bounced to another store at a certain threshold. So really, you can see kind of the optimization of what's going on inside of stores from an omni-channel perspective. And some of the initiatives around this omni-channel are as simple as they're wanting to have the ability to have some system configuration to implement holiday-specific customer appeasement and coupon strategies. All right, I'm going to move on to the automation or robotics trend. So we're certainly seeing that trend of increased automation as a result of labor costs rising, right? I'm talking about sortation, robotic picking, goods to person, auto bagging, carton building, all automation. And while that may seem pretty obvious, a few other effects of this. So we're seeing as the dependency on automation in the distribution center specifically increases, so does the risk. And of course, we're trying to mitigate risk during peak season. So we're recognizing and working with customers on their need to bypass automation when it breaks down, right, and have tested contingency in place, right, for those situations. And even if you have a good contingency, in the most obvious example would be, a put wall in the distribution center to bypass a large sorter. But we see some customers even use that contingency as extra capacity during peak season. So you got that advantage.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to note. We'll add on to that extra capacity during peak season later in the slides. But when you do look at automation, one of the most popular ones out there nowadays is a packaging solution. Just like ProShip, we offer a CVP solution that helps minimize dimensional weight charges while allowing warehouses to do more with their existing labor force. And of course, if you don't have to bring on as many temp workers, isn't that one of the major goals of the automation and robotics pieces?
Yep. Hey, a couple of points I wanted to make there, Justin, before I move on to the labor shortage topic is we're seeing customers also to bypass that automation in the distribution center, or to have contingency when their distribution center is not available or parts of their distribution center aren't available. They're leveraging their stores, right, more and more. Not only extra capacity, but obviously the quicker delivery time, and having that kind of external contingency. If an entire distribution center is unavailable, like think a winter ice storm or fires or whatever, by able to leverage stores is a pretty important thing to have in place.
I really want to add to that. Remember, there are 4 inventory sources for most retailers: your DCs, your stores. Those are your internal inventory sources. Externally, you've got your manufacturers and potentially 3PLs. So as Scott is saying here, when you have those contingency plans, make sure you include all 4 of those inventory sources. Go ahead, Scott. Great point.
Yeah. One last thing on the automation. there's important stuff here, Justin. I want to get it all out there. So, as we've seen this dependency on automation increase, there's some pretty significant investments going into this, right? So the focus on utilization of those assets has been top of mind. Specifically, we in Manhattan are seeing a lot of strong interest in how our WMS ties with our newer order streaming, which is waveless picking, and how our warehouse execution system signals now maximize the usage of and leverage of those MHE investments. So a lot going on in that area. All right, I'm going to move on to the labor shortages. Hey, I'm sure you're all feeling the effects of this. It's a big challenge this year. Right now we're attempting to onboard all those warehouse temp workers as well as additional store associates. And so from a trend perspective, as customers get ready for peak season, we're seeing an acceleration of the trends or the demands for simplification of functions that are used by temp labor, obviously to reduce their training time. So I'm referring to the use of mobile picking devices, anything that makes functions easier to use, full screen, touch screen UIs, and then that. So moving on here, Justin, I'll let you comment on the delivery and collection options.
Yeah, delivery and collection options have never been greater than they are now. We're seeing a massive increase in crowdsourced delivery solutions, same-day delivery requirements, and even postal last mile services. And to reiterate, by adding all four of those inventory sources, it allows a lot of our customers to implement these various delivery theories, these delivery solutions, and still reduce some of the costs, and in some cases significantly save costs on their shipping to the customers, while of course providing them with more flexibility, more power, more control over the delivery process.
Yeah, very nice. So lastly, from an industry trends perspective, I'm seeing a renewed focus on returns and efficient returns process. And as you know, return season's right at the end of peak season. So, and the try it before you buy it trend that we're seeing is also leading to increased returns. So some typical projects we're seeing is enabling the ease of buy online and return to store. I mean, the customer experience and the efficiency around that. And in the distribution centers, we're seeing customers wanting to leverage full screen, touch-enabled returns processing. And even we're even seeing the need for store inventory pullback capabilities, right? Recycling that inventory to distribution centers based on seasonal changes to product lines. Effectively, what didn't sell during peak season, return it back to the distribution center. All right, I know that was quite the list. We should probably move on to the corrective and optimizational list. Justin, you want to run through that?
Sure, of course. So when we're looking at corrective and optimization, one of the first things we look at is where the pain points are. So, your pain points might be in inventory availability. They might be in labor availability and capacity. They might be in shipping costs. If inventory availability is your issue, you might want to evaluate, again, those external sources, because if you don't have enough inventory at one side of the country, or if you can't get enough stock of a particular item, you may need to have it shipped directly from a manufacturer. So again, think about those four inventory sources. Labor availability or capacity. If this is a concern, you really want automation, because automation allows you to do more with less. You want to look at your business rules. Could they be extended or simplified? You want to minimize the manual entry and maximize compliance of any of your business rules, right? And take a lot of burden off of the labor within the warehouse. You want to look into machinery. So maybe it's scan, weigh, print, and apply tunnels, the CVP that I talked about before, picking, packing robots, and others. And then finally, within the labor component, you want to look at reviewing where are you producing your labels? Are you doing what's known as front of line shipping, where you're producing a label before you touch the goods? Or are you doing all end of line shipping, which is a solution that works great if you have multiple line items on an order. Therefore, you're not going to know the final box dimensions or weight of the solution.
Hey, Justin, real quick, for my own benefit, you talk about front of line and end of line here. would you be able to expand a bit on how those two options might impact peak season, throughput or efficiency specifically?
Of course, because it's really important. So I know I just gave you a basic understanding of it with when you produce a label. Do you do it at the front of the warehouse line? Do you do it at the end of the warehouse line? So this is the where the two terms come from. But really, what we look at is what is the goods that you're going to touch? If you have an item that's in a case, or an item that's already got a box certificate on it, like a Dyson vacuum, there's no reason in your warehouse to touch that more than once. Pull it off the rack, apply the carrier label to it, and it should go straight into the carrier trailer. Okay. Whereas an end of line, where we may have to do void fill, we may run out of a particular box size, so we're going to have to we may have to use a larger box than we want to, or something of that nature, or more void fill, things of that nature. It makes a lot more sense to pass those across to scale and implement that in an end of line ship and execution piece. Yeah.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say that makes sense. Thank you.
So, and of course, when we're at this point, we're thinking about shipping costs. Okay, so if your shipping costs are higher, and this is the third point I wanted to make as part of our components here, is if your shipping costs are higher than you would expect, maybe you want to look at things like rate shopping. And even within a single carrier, are you looking at when you're using ground, when you're using express, when you're using postal last mile solutions? Have you automated this selection process? Are you expecting the personnel at the line to actually determine whether or not it needs to go ground or whether or not it should go express? Okay, and of course, again, I'm going to hit this maximizing of your inventory sources, because if you have a manufacturer that is a couple hundred miles away from that customer, a ground shipment or a postal last mile shipment is going to get it there in 2 days or less. And so you really want to have that capability to lower your shipping costs by increasing your origin points.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for that insight. All right, let's move on to the all-important evaluation task. Now that you've gone through all of your potential strategic initiatives, we're going to have to move on to evaluate them. The evaluation involves collecting the effort and scope, understanding the budget, and the important step of defining the expected results, which I don't always see our customers doing. But what are those success metrics if you're going to put forth this investment? Are you going to see dollar savings, labor savings, throughput, productivity, fill rate, ship on time? The list goes on. But kind of important to evaluate all of those.
It is. Evaluation is extremely important, because if you haven't evaluated, you can't move on to the next thing. Because let's face it, not all initiatives will be able to be implemented in a given off season. So we have to look at the results of this evaluation phase and start the prioritization process. It's up to the business leaders within the organization to select the appropriate mix of initiatives that will have the best impact of innovation and stability for the business systems.
Yep, and then after prioritization, the leadership certainly has to select and commit to these initiatives to be executed in the off season for the year. Yeah,
we see a big difference between selection and commitment.
Yeah, commitment. Commitment's the real need. It's not just about budget, timeline, resources, business will. This is where I see customers stumble a bit. They cause delay for themselves. So set yourself a deadline for this commit, because dragging it out, the commitment can quickly become a non-commit. Mm-hmm. I mean, as leaders here, maybe sometimes it takes a little bit of upward management, right? Ensuring your executive team knows how critical it is to start on time. You saw that calendar, so starting on time is critical.
Yeah, a lack of timely decision is a commitment to do little or nothing in the off season. Scott, when do you see most companies needing to decide or commit by?
So I'd say if the list is modest, it's typically March time frame. If they're major, you may have already needed to start for the following peak season. It kind of depends, but you can quickly, if you look at the calendar, you can quickly find your commitment date if you roughly know your scope and level of effort by backing in the dates from the peak validation phase, which I guess is where we'll be going to next here. Yeah, Yeah. So before we get there, we got to roll through the execution. So after we commit, we got to execute, and the execution is typically the configuration or development, the testing, or the deployment, and the time frame for that is usually around that April-August time frame.
Yeah, this is where your internal project teams and your external project teams, maybe that's ProShip or Manhattan or somebody else, they have to actually commence building the solutions with input from the stakeholders and operations. We want to ensure that as those teams, both internal and external, that they have access to resources and stakeholders, right? Really need to be able to get those decisions made as quickly as possible. And remember, because you're going to have so many teams potentially working at the same time, internal, ERP, WMS, hardware vendors, shipping system vendors, unexpected results from one team can cascade into another system and make changes to the deployment timeline. And so because of this, we want to ensure that you've got a conflict resolution process in place and that it's a good one.
Yeah, which kind of goes hand in hand with my next recommendation here to include weeks of contingency in your project plan, right? I mean, just this year, I had a customer that was proceeding with a critical needed for peak enhancements. They had a QA system failure right in the middle of their testing phase. Well, they were able to replace their hardware pretty quickly. They effectively lost 3 weeks because their testing team, the plans were disrupted. The new environment had some quirks that need to be worked out, et cetera. But luckily, because they had that testing contingency built into their plan, they were still able to deploy that enhancement before peak season. Now, if that contingency, those weeks of contingency weren't built into that plan, they would not have had the time for testing, and the business very likely would not have accepted the risk for deploying it to peak. So you can kind of see that net their investments they put forth in 2018 for this year's peak would not have provided the benefits until 2019 peak. Which also reminds me of another point, Justin, is around the need for holistic management. You were talking about all these different systems, all the different inner working groups and companies. Someone to holistically project management, project manage everything, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's got to happen because peak season isn't moving. There's no ability to move Christmas.
That's right. Yeah, we've tried. It doesn't work. Can't move
Christmas.
Not
work. Yeah. So let's move on to the validation stage. All right. So before you can enter UAT, your users need to be trained on the new features and new functionalities. You've worked really hard on these things over the past 6 to 9 months, sometimes even years, right? So you want to do that training. This is going to make it easier to go through UAT, find any problems. This is also a great time, by the way, to prepare your temporary worker training for the year.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that concept of ensuring the training's in place even before as you get into this testing phase. So let me talk a little bit about that. So this volume performance test that we recommend is pretty critical. If your last peak was challenging, of course, or B, if the volume is increased beyond the original sizing assumptions, or if your processes have changed. Right, you've likely added some, local optimizations in certain areas throughout your solutions as part of your peak season prep initiative. So you need to know if the weakest link has moved and if those are going to be resilient to high volumes. Now, I want to clarify a few things. A VPT is typically performed in a non-production environment using scripting, right, to simulate high volume for key transactions or processes or interface, whatever we feel is most prone to becoming the bottleneck, right? And a VPT can also include this concept of a surge test. So think of a surge test as testing out if an upstream system fails or holds back orders, right? Well, we can all calculate what we think our high volume days are going to be, and we can run a volume performance test on that. We also need to test if an upstream system suddenly freezes up and holds back orders, and we get slammed with 10x or 100x the kind of volume. See if those interfaces can handle the deep queues, the interface load, etc. So that's what the surge test is about.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, from a software standpoint, there are different optimizations that we have to put in place when we're dealing with handling a doubling over a day versus a doubling or tripling for a few minutes or hours because of those holds to upstreams or that surge process.
Agreed. So so moving on to compression testing.
Yeah. So compression testing is this is in our case usually this is where you artificially hold things back. But the big difference is here in compression testing, you're doing this in a live system to evaluate system readiness.
Yeah, and I consider this the most important test of them all because it tests everything. It tests the systems, interfaces, tests processes, tests your people, your SOPs, and because it's so important, I've seen a lot of customers take very creative approaches to achieving this. So what you're really doing is you're holding back orders to, I guess, not simulate, to actually cause a peak season for as many hours as you can on a given day. You're causing a peak season in production. Hold and release, kind of a compression, and customers will leverage, one-day sales or summer sales or Labor Day sales to make sure they have that volume of orders to really compress and cause this. But again, the key here is not just to test systems, but to test your DC or your store operations processes. Like, bring in some temp workers. And if you have some peak season specific processes, conduct those too, right? If you have any value-added services, gift wrapping, even for grocery customers, they're doing some special things with turkeys around that time of year. That should be all included so you have a fully comprehensive compression test. And, this also includes testing store systems that would perhaps be processing ship from store orders.
Yeah. With all this, you need to, again, I'm gonna go back to the concept of front of line versus end of line operations. You need to understand that for that human machine augmentation options, what are you going to use? When you use people to serve, because automation is overloaded, and when do you how do you properly prepare for augmentation with or failover completely to a manual process? Do you have those contingencies in place?
Yep. All right. So of course, once you complete all this testing, you need to identify and implement any solutions to any of the problems you uncover. So you may actually need to conduct the test again, have a follow-up test. So make sure you build that into your time frame if at all possible. So moving on to the readiness phase. So these are the activities. What is this? October, November timeframe. So these are the activities that should have already occurred by now. It's November 1st. You might have some time to squeeze a few of these in. So disaster management and recovery. So it includes a variety of things. Your standard high availability and DR processes. Who executes those for your systems for those processes that are not automatic? I too often do see customers with disaster recovery processes on paper, but they're not really ready to efficiently and quickly execute them. So right here, I can't stress enough the importance of truly testing your DR processes. And then what are your processes for unforeseen distribution center outages, right? Are you going to be able to leverage stores, redivert to other distribution centers? And I can remember not too long ago, we had some big ice storms come through the country and knock out entire distribution centers, that week of Cyber Week, and they were unable to ship. And those customers had to figure out how to divert orders to other distribution centers or to their stores. And processing processes for store outages. How to quickly redirect orders to ship from other stores efficiently if a store suddenly becomes available for maybe similar causes.
Yeah, and let's not forget some other things that can happen too. So the carriers may have some disasters that happen there. They may end up with unable to ship to certain areas, or have their capacity or their carrier network might be overloaded in that area. And though this isn't exactly a disaster, but sometimes you do have things where you're going to have to modify service levels or downgrade service levels based upon inventory availability. So we had one of our customers, they had a shipment coming in from China, and it got delayed because of a storm at sea, right? So now when that came in, they still had commitments to their customers, right? So they had to upgrade some. They could keep some of their service levels at the same level, but will your systems be able to do this automatically, or will you have to do this manually within your system?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry to sound so doom and gloom there, Justin. maybe I can talk a little. Maybe I can talk a little more proactive here. So on to tech audits. So my recommendation would be when you're doing technical audits, leverage your system vendor's technical audit programs. They know what to look out for. So Manhattan, we offer what we call a SureCheck technical audit program. I'm sure other providers out there offer their own kind of audit programs, but it audits all the settings we recommend, so our solutions work optimally from a database, operating system, Java container level. And the advantage of using a vendor-specific tech audit program is you're going to benefit from all the optimizations and learnings that they've found when working with their other customers. Of course, we also check things like database tuning, maintenance verification, data retention adjustments, license key expiration, and things like that.
All right. So that, another thing with because of the fact that you're sitting here with a very specific configuration for peak season, and we just talked about all the ways where that configuration can be made null and void, right? Do you have your personnel set up? Have they been trained on how to modify these items that we can configure, how to switch some variables within the systems? And are these people who have been trained, are they available on all the appropriate shifts? Okay, again, you want to look at things like, carrier network overload, last minute negotiated specials, or a super weekend, if you will. If you can't adjust your system, or you don't have the right people to adjust the system, often that means you have to go to a vendor like ourselves and have us schedule a person to do that, which of course is going to take time.
Yeah, very good point. All right, so after all these readiness tasks are completed, we of course move then into the next phase of monitoring support, which takes us full circle and where we are today, and we frankly start it all over again. All right. So key takeaways. As we wrap up this webinar, I'd like to outline what we consider the key takeaways from each of the phases. So,
and Scott, while we're outlining this, now is a great time for anybody who's listening. We're going to have a few minutes at the end here for questions. Now is a great time to submit those if you've got any.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Yeah, so number one, start early. You saw the calendar. You see where you should typically be performing testing, and you got to back in dates into that. And leverage the Manhattan and ProShip partnerships. We'd love to help you with your peak season success. Engage us in those strategic planning sessions if appropriate. Number two, importance of including contingency in your plan. You heard the story I told you, but you can't move Christmas. Number three is testing your disaster recovery processes. Don't just put it on a piece of paper, but go ahead and actually execute it and make sure it's fully functional. Four would be to conduct that training during that validation phase, as well as, again, I can't stress the importance of a true compression test as a test more than just systems. It tests processes and people. Number five, around monitoring and support. Again, assign that record-keeping role. We want to learn as much as we can learn during the peak season to make the next one better than today's. And then last, that schedule that January peak meeting now, as Justin mentioned earlier.
All right. Okay, so with that, we're open to taking any questions from the audience. Sarit, can you let Scott and I know if any have been submitted?
Yeah, hi, Justin. So I do see one question. By all means, anyone else who's listening in, feel free to add any more. So let me just ask you this one question we got, and it says the following. Is the peak season prep process any different for customers using cloud-based or managed services solutions? And the question is specifically asking here about how the prep process would be different for WMS or order management if Manhattan was providing their managed services and therefore was responsible for the environment. Would either of you want to take this?
Yeah, I can take that, Justin, if you're cool with that.
Yeah.
All right. So I'd say most of everything still applies, except more of the technical tasks. I mentioned that, I guess the technical audit wouldn't be needed. That's pretty much performed automatically. And the beauty of some of these cloud environments is the elastic nature of them. So most of your testing would be more of a compression test to test processes, people. You're still going to need to conduct the strategic planning and execution phases if you're executing new material handling, new parcel, what have you. And of course, like I just said, we'll still have to roll through the validation test to make sure everything kind of tested end to end. And you still want to lock down everything at the monitoring or the readiness phase. So yeah, overall pretty similar, except the technical tasks would be somewhat minimized.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, those technical tasks, they're probably still going to have to occur, but of course you're expecting those to occur from your cloud vendor rather than within your own organization.
Yep, you got it.
All right. We're about 10 minutes to the top of the hour. Do we have anything else left?
Well, I just got one question, which I was going to make a remark about either way. So let me just let everyone on the call know that we will be sending the deck for this presentation. It's going to hit your inbox probably tomorrow, and you'll be getting that so you can obviously share with your teams and use that for your preparation. Any other questions? Let's see. There is nothing else I'm seeing on my end. Anything from you, Justin, to summarize?
All right. Hey, I think so no more questions? Okay.
Nope.
All right. So I guess before we sign off today, I would like to thank you all for your time. And please feel free to follow up with me directly if you're interested in discussing any of this content in more detail, as I would really love to help you with your peak season success.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody who's attended as well. If there are any questions, we've got a chat site on our chat capability on our website. Please hit us up. If you're a ProShip customer, talk to your account managers, and if there are any questions, email or call us. We'd love to help out anybody who's anywhere in their processes right now.
Agreed. And just wanted to conclude here from this side. Just wanted to thank all the speakers, of course, and the attendees for your time today. Thank you, Scott and Justin, for the wonderful content, and we'll be sharing this deck shortly with all of you. Just wanted to wish everyone best of luck during this peak season, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.